Chapter 76. Now, Dr. Johnson, along with Boswell acting as his squire, happened, in August of 73, to be crossing into Scotland as well, upon their famous trip to the Hebrides. More likely, snorts Ives, they didn't pass within 100 miles of Mason. Yet, speculates the Reverend, did all hesitate upon the border at some rude inn just before taking the fatal step across into the Celtic unknown. Sitting at a table, drinking ale, observing the mist through the window panes. Mason 45, the Cham 64. You seem a serious young man with Thames side intonations in your voice, if I'm not mistaken. Sir, I saw you at the Mitre Tavern once. Royal Society, are you? As your own intonation already implies, sir, not bloody likely, is it, though I have contracted with them, and more than once. You're the stargazer. What's his name? Mason, Boswell informs him. Damn if that's not it exactly, says Mason. Thank ye, gents, although this time I am come upon an errand of gravity. He explains to them his search for a Scottish mountain, suiting as many as possible of masculine stipulations. Boswell's gaze brightening. He's Clive of India's brother-in-law. Do you suppose the nabob wants to buy a mountain? Good Lord! Masculine! Working in confidence as a land agent? I never thought of that. Then you are not as corrupted as you believe you are. At least, according to the creases of your phiz, sir, somewhat brusquely announces Dr. Johnson. Such relative innocence may be a sacred asset, yet a secular liability. May you ever distinguish the one from the other. Oh, and Mason, your servant, be careful. Of what, sir? Of the attention you'll be getting up there, if your principal's illustrious relation becomes widely known. That was Boswell. Warns Mr. Boswell, himself a Scot. Upon the map I carry, declares Dr. J., nothing appears beyond here but mountains. In practice, to examine them all is a task without end, and every Scot you meet will be trying to sell you at least one, that he, and ignore not she, happens to know of. These people are strong, shrewd. Be not deceived by any level of the exotic they may present you, kilts, bagpipes sort of thing, haggis. You must keep unfailing vigilance. Mr. Boswell bows elaborately whilst keeping his eyeballs upon the roll. Out there in the fog, brimming and sweeping now over ridge tops and into the glens, somewhere it waits, the world across the next line, in darkness and isolation, barren, unforgiving. A nation that within Mason's lifetime has risen to seize the crown, been harrowed into submission, then been shipped in great lots to America. I imagine there's yet a bit of resentment about. The doctor snorts. The word you grope for is hatred, sir, inveterate, inflexible hatred. The 45 lives on here, a ghost from a Gothic novel, ubiquitous, frightfully shattered, exhibiting gallons of a certain crimson fluid, typical of the people, don't you see? Aye, he means me, sighs Mr. Boswell. He picks up the bone remnant of a chop and gestures with it. Soon he will commence with the cannibalism jokes, pray you miss it not. 'Tis more hilarious than may at first seem likely. All his lifelong enmity emerging at last in this way. No one knows why, but he intends to go to the Hebrides, to the furthest isle, to view the dark ages upon display. The uncomplicated people, labouring with their primitive tools. Oh, fuck's sake. The uncomplicated people, labouring with their primitive tools, gushes Mason. The simplicity of faith, lo, it's time reborn. 'Tis fascinating, this belief among you men of science, remarks Dr. J, that time is ever more simply transcended, the further one is willing to journey away from London to observe it. Why, Mason here's done the very thing, cries Boswell, in America. Ask him. Mason glowers, shaking his head. I've ascended, descended, even condescended, and the list's not ended, but haven't yet transcended a blessed thing. Thank ye. The savages of America, intones the doctor. What powers do they possess, and how do they use them? As if here, at the edge of the world, they might confide what no one would ever say aloud in London, with Boswell a bustle to get it all scribbled down into his quarto. The abruptness of the doctor's question reminds Mason of himself, addressing the learned English dog a dozen years ago. His mouth creeps upward at the corners, almost achieving an horizontal. Would that my coadjutor, Mr. Dixon, were here, says Mason, missing Dixon as he speaks. For the magical in all its occurrences, to others of us how absent, was ever his subject. Potions, rain-making, the undoing of enemies remote. That Mandeville of Mohawks would be sure to enlighten you. I can myself testify to little beyond the giant mounds that the savages say they guard as curators for some more distant race of builders. I have failed to observe more in them than their most impressive size, though Mr. Dixon swears to coded inscriptions, purpose of lamination and employment unto the present day by agents unknown of powers invisible. Yet, appropriately enough, what compels me out under the elements once again now is yet another damned species of giant mound, and after hoping I'd seen my last in America. Whoa, it seems I've acquired a specialty, and the elevated, the chosen, go on assigning me to these exercises in large-scale geometry. This mountain I'm about to seek must be regular as a prism, as if purposefully constructed in days of old by forces more powerful than ours, powerful enough to suggest that God, whatever that may be, has not altogether quit our own desperate day. You're not pleased with his frequency of appearance, frowns Johnson. Sir, be wary, for the next step in such petulance is to define him as some all-pervading fairy dust and style it deism. Do you think I wasn't looking? All that long ass-breaking American time. Mounds, caverns, things that went across the sky. Had you seen one of those, 'twould have made you think twice. Even giant vegetables, if it had to be, seeking salvation in the oversized. How pitiable! What of it? I've little pride. Some great squash upon the trail side. I'll take it, won't I? I'd have been happy with the Cock Lane ghost, Johnson mutters. Happy, Mason nods, eyes far too bright. You were ill-treated, sir, in that matter. Be careful to note, Boswell, how even a lunatic may yet be civil. Thank you, sir. Or is it your holiness? I, all but pleading for someone's judgment of madness, as if desiring to be admitted to that select company, select as the Royal Society, which did not want him either. I had my Boswell once, Mason tells Boswell. Dixon and I, we had a joint Boswell, preacher man, named Cherrycoke, scribbling everything down just like you, sir. Have you, twirling his hand in ellipses, ever had one yourself, if I'm not prying? Had one what? A Boswell, sir. I mean, of your own. Well, you couldn't very well call him that, being one yourself. Say a sort of a shadow ever in the room who has haunted you, preserving your every spoken remark. Which else would have been lost forever to the great wind of oblivion. Think, arm sweep south, as all civilized Britain gathers at this hour, how much shapely expression from the titled gambler, the barmaid suitor, the offended fopling, the gratified tosspot is simply fading away upon the air, out under the door, into the evening and the silence beyond. All those voices, why not pluck a few words from the multitudes rushing toward the void of forgetfulness? The mountain, he finds for Maskelyne, will be too regular to be natural. Like Silbury Hill, it will have the look of ancient earthwork about it, and 'twill be Maskelyne who goes to Chez Hellion after Mason refuses the assignment again, and becomes famous for it, not to mention beloved of the Scots people there, the subject of a ballad, and presently a figure of legend, in a strange, wizards turn out based upon an actual observing suit he will wear whilst in Perthshire. A plaid one, in fact, of Maskelyne's own design. A tartan never observed in the world, he explains, that no one clan up there be offended. Or everyone, Munn is quick to point out. Mason will go back to waking day after day in Sapperton, piecing together odd cash jobs for the Royal Society, reductions for Maskelyne's almanac, small children everywhere, a neat observatory out in the garden, a reputation in the Golden Valley as a sorcerer's apprentice who once climbed that strange eminence at Greenwich, up into another level of power, sailed to all parts of the globe, but came back down among them again. They will be easy with him. Call him Charlie. At last, another small-town eccentric absorbed back into the weavery, keeping a workspace fitted out some place in the back of some long Cotswold house, down a chain of rooms back from the lane and out into the crooked looming of those hillside fields. End of chapter.